All right, Ben, welcome to the Al Black Show. Great to have you on board.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Anytime. Now, today's date is Friday, March 27. This is the first show that I've recorded since the whole COVID-19 thing blew up. Without getting into specific events, because we'll get to those later, how has this whole situation affected you and what you're up to right now?
Well, it's affected my travel plans and my personal plans. As I was just mentioning to you briefly, I'm supposed to be on a holiday at the moment after working the last couple of months pretty intensely. So theoretically, I should be in Mexico right now, and I'm not.
Okay.
I'm in country Victoria. But in terms of work itself, it's all kind of shut down.
Yeah.
The festivals around the world are all no longer happening. The spread of this virus, I guess, from, one human to another, is the risk of that is amplified heavily when you've got so many gathered in one place. So they've taken the necessary decision to shut down large events for a period of time, which is, distressing for a lot of my colleagues. I mean, and, a lot of my personal social community, I guess, are all built around the music industry. So.
Yeah, sure. Mine too. So there's people hurting all over the place. So it was last week. I lost all my gigs. Pretty much the beginning of last week. It was just phone call after text message after email just coming in, and it was like all gone. So
yeah,
it's tough times. But enough about the virus. We'll move on to more upbeat things. Let's kick off with where you grew up. So was it? Were you a Bayside boy in Melbourne? Is that right?
Yeah, originally I was in the Bayside area as a child. I spent some time in the UK for 4 years with my father's job, and some time in the States for a while. But predominantly from sort of 8 years old onwards was in Bayside.
Yeah, and for those of the people listening that are out there that don't know Bayside Melbourne, how would you describe it, and how did you find growing up there?
I mean, it's a great area to raise a family. It's by the beach. It's it's affluent. It's safe. Beautiful, big size, generous property blocks and nice houses. I was fortunate to grow up there. To be fair.
Cool. Well, was there ever a light bulb moment, or maybe there was a couple where you were at an event or a club or some other situation where you thought, "Fuck getting a real job. I'm just going to run with this whole dance music thing."
Well, I kind of never had a real job, so I started promoting underage shows as a kid. I got handed a flyer for something that was happening during the school holidays, and it said, to become a promoter, call this number. And I did. And I went into a community radio station called Kicks FM, which was running at the time. I met a guy called Paul Barbaro. Paul became pretty influential in my teenage years. He was my first real boss. Looked up to him quite a lot. He taught me how to promote shows and underage dance parties. So that was the first job I ever really had. I had other jobs to support my income at other stages, but it was kind of, I fell into it and then worked out that I was pretty reasonable at it in terms of drawing a crowd and getting paid as a promoter to begin with, because you used to get paid on performance. And then after a few years of that, sort of realized that, there was an opportunity to potentially run my own events. So it was kind of from a pretty early age, the main job, the main sort of thing I've had in my career.
Yeah. So what sort of year are we talking around for that?
14.
Yeah. So and Kicks FM,
they were year out. Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, something like that.
And Kicks FM, they were around with Hits FM and Kiss FM back in the 90s. So
yeah, it was a community one, so it only used to broadcast for three months out of the year.
Yep.
And yeah, basically it was just a dance music dedicated channel. It was the only one of its kind back then, so it was quite a cool thing.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, just to add a bit of context here, we first met back in the late noughties, I think it was. I got in touch with Big Dog Entertainment about doing a closing party for the infamous Bowie Hotel down there in Beaumaris, Bayside. Yeah. Can you tell us how you got involved with the boys from Big Dog, and what sort of things were Big Dog doing back then?
It was pretty funny because I met Josh and Steve and Gaz all actually doing promo work. We used to work on behalf of like marketing agencies where we would get paid by the hour to go and do work, on behalf of various brands for, 4 or 5 hours here or 5 hours there, or a day here, or the Melbourne Motor Show, or, whatever. You might be exhibiting a car for Saab or BMW or whatever it was back then.
Sure.
And that was how I met Josh and Steve, and they were more in a TV background back then, TV production. They had this funny thing going on called Free Shit Man, where basically they just went around and asked people for free shit.
Yeah, right.
And turned it into a TV show.
I think I remember that.
That was one of the first things I ever saw from them. I thought it was pretty funny. But Josh always had a pretty endearing sort of spark about him. You know, he was definitely able to get you to get on board with an idea, and you know, in a sense, he was a good leader. So he was someone that I wanted to spend time around, that I was drawn to, and you know, it was exciting. There was a culture of startups happening around that time as well. You know, all over the world, you'd heard about all this great stuff coming out of Silicon Valley, and you know, just like this air of, you know, young people being able to create their own companies instead of having to go work for big corporates. So that was appealing to me at the time as well. So in the beginning, we kind of started working together, and I kind of brought the music element in with me a little bit, and then Gaz and Dan joined us as well, and they were also independent promoters at the time. They had their own thing called Summer Series or Summer Sessions back then. And so they'd already been making a few parties around town. I had a lot of experience making parties. And then the guys, Josh and Steve, you know, they had a big network too. And so we originally started doing after parties for these major promo events, like the Australian Open Tennis or the Melbourne Motor Show or whatever, where you'd have like 400 or 500 promo staff that'd be working for 2 weeks or a week or however long. You know, the F1 was another good one. And you'd get them all together and throw an after party, and we built a database that way of quite attractive, you know, young, cool people. So they're all promo models. And that was the beginning of our database, and the realization that we had a network of young people that were, you know, interested in socializing in, you know, this sort of event space.
Great way to build a database.
Yeah, it was. It was a good place to start. And that's kind of, you know, these are small parties. These are like 400, 500 person parties.
Yeah. So, I mean, you eventually headed off in another direction from the boys at Big Dog. Was there any particular reason why that happened, or was it just an organic process, just time for something different?
A bit of both. Opportunity, organic, tide was up. So we did, like I was there for 5 years. So at that time, we went from these small parties, after parties for the Australian Open, to being effectively the brand managers for Head Kandi in Australia. And in Melbourne, we were the event agents for Pacha, for Ministry of Sound. And, you know, these were the in brands at the time. You know, these were the seminal sort of music brands in our scene. So we kind of got to the ceiling of what we could achieve with these medium-sized parties. We had a crack at an event and bit off a bit more that we could chew on New Year's Day a few years back. Lost a bit of money, and I just thought, well, we've kind of hit the ceiling, because there was already major festivals in the market, and we were occupying this middle space competing with these major festivals. And then eventually, funnily enough, a year later, the major festivals came knocking on my door, and they wanted me to move across. And so I had a very strong sense of loyalty to Big Dog. So in the beginning, I would move across. I actually subcontracted Big Dog on and set up a deal for us to present stages on their behalf.
Is that Future Entertainment? Yep. Yeah,
it was Future Entertainment, Future Music Group. So we had the Big Dog stage at Summer Days, and then at the Future Music Festival. And, you know, we sold more tickets than they'd ever sold in the history through an external promoter to a good crowd, because our database was quite a great database. And yeah, we had our own little VIP area. It was busy all day. They gave us some great international acts to play on the stage. It was my first real taste of running a giant festival stage.
Yeah. How'd you find that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a step up, but it was also, as I said, I felt like I was sort of at the ceiling, and I do tend to get bored when I reach the ceiling of something. So I was kind of at that point. And then, so after 1 year of Big Dog being contracted to Future, they came after me directly for a role, which kind of satisfied a bit of a personal desire, because I'd started dating a girl in New York City at that time, and wanted to spend half the year there. And the Future role was only for 6 months of the year.
Yeah.
So opportunity intersecting with timing led to that change, basically.
I was about to ask, because I know that you spent some time over there. I think it was like 3 or 4 years, and that's kind of where your seasonal lifestyle kind of happened. And I was wondering what the catalyst was for that, but you just explained what it was. It was a girl.
Yeah, well, she was dancing on Broadway, and there's only one place you could pursue that dream.
Yeah, exactly.
And drive in a woman is something that I find attractive, so I was willing to support that for sure. New York was an exciting place, somewhere that I'd visited, but I hadn't sort of spent any decent time. And I was backpacking crazy back then in my early 20s. I was just had the travel bug like mad, so still do. But it was so it was desirable to get to New York City as well, and went out there with good savings and not a lot of stress in my life and some good friends, and thought, I'll give this a crack, and worst case that's going to happen, I'm going to hang out in New York City.
How bad can it be?
Yeah, exactly.
But you got over there and you ended up becoming a part owner of a club there. It was Verboten, German for forbidden. Now, how did you get yourself with the other owners, I guess, of that venue? And can you tell us a bit more about what you're all getting back up to back then? Because I think it was Deep House you were into at that time. Yeah,
well, I think around then, that was when sort of Deep House music was breaking out on a global scale. So you had JB Jones, Remix, Azarian Third, Hungry for the Power. That was a big record at the time. And just these guys like Lee Foss and Jamie, and they were just starting to break through. And in Brooklyn was sort of, the cool spot, and these underground parties were taking place. And the brand that I recognized immediately when I arrived in New York was Circo Loco. And there was a local promoter called Verboten that were hosting the Circo Loco New York event. And that grabbed my attention immediately. Because if I wanted to align with a promoter over there, that was definitely who I wanted to align with, the people that were producing shows like that. Circo Loco for me still is probably the biggest influence in terms of a global clubbing brand or place that I spend time. It's just it's a powerhouse, it's an institution, and so I thought these New York promoters must be the real deal. So grabbed some tickets, rounded up a lot of friends actually for that show, because in my head I decided I wanted to meet these promoters and have a chat with them, and also, drag a good crowd along with me and make a good impression. So I was living in a loft in Tribeca with 5 other dudes at the time. It was a whole floor. It was a bit of a madhouse. We had half a basketball court in the living room, and 4 TV screens going on, and a ping pong table and a DJ booth, and so you can imagine it was like a grown-up frat house basically.
Yeah. So, everything you need.
Pretty much at 24. So I rounded up all the guys and said, look, grab a few friends, and then grabbed my girlfriend and said, grab all your dance friends, and let's all go to this. It'll be a lot of fun. And we ended up being about 24 of us, I think, or 22 of us rolling into this party, and grabbed a few tables, and just had a great time. And I got chatting to the promoter, and she's like, who are you? What's your deal? I said, we should have a chat. And so I went and had lunch with them the following week, and they're a husband-wife couple that were running it. He was the marketing brains and the sort of brand direction and the image of it. She was the business side of it, the bookings, and she's a bit of a bulldog, so she was doing the business stuff. And it was an interesting thing because we had this great conversation. At that time, I was also working in sponsorship acquisition, so I had a bit of a knack for getting liquor brands to part finance these type of events. So it's a skill I brought with me from Australia, where I had a small business doing that on the side. And so I was, we had this great discussion about what I could bring to the table and add value, because my aim at this point was to get a green card, to get sponsorship, so that I could, come and go as I pleased. Because at that point I had 2 passports, so I was shuffling 90 days tourist visas. And so we had this chat, but then it went quiet for a while. Like, I didn't hear from them, and I still kept going to the parties because the music was really good, and it was the type of events I wanted to be. Socially, I was meeting some cool people at those events, and I just moved to the city. So it was nice to kind of find that sort of, area within the social context where you felt really comfortable. And so I kept going to the events, and then one day I found myself sort of like elbow to elbow next to the owner, John, at the bar, in one of those unavoidable moments where a conversation's obviously about to start.
Yeah.
I said, oh, hey man, I'm really, really glad to see you here. It's interesting, blah, 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 blah. What do you think? I said, oh yeah, well, the music's great. Of course I'm going to keep coming. He goes, I go, did you get that email I wrote you? He goes, yeah, actually, you know what? It was a really good email. I was a little bit blown away by it. And then we got caught up with this Macioplex show we had the following week. And to be honest, I've just been snowed under, and I'm sorry I haven't gotten back to you. And in the end, long story short, he goes, "What do you reckon the next step is?" I said, "We should have lunch." You know. And so we sat down, his wife, himself, and I, that following week in Brooklyn, in this little Polish sandwich shop. I'll never forget the place. And we just agreed. I said, "Look, how about this? How about I come work on some shows with you for free for a month? And if at the end of the month I haven't added value, you don't want me involved in the organisation, fair enough. But if you do, then you agree that you're going to sponsor my green card." And she said, "Yeah, I like that." So we shook hands, and then away we went. So the following Friday, we had a boat cruise on Circle Line Cruises in New York, which is a 3-story boat. It was Guti, Guy Gerber, a couple of the guys from Vision Quest, Lee Curtis, Ryan Crossan. It was a good lineup. And I remember it was just disorganized when we arrived at the show. You know, all these people standing there with tickets, but no one really knowing where to line up. No bollards set up for the entrance, you know, because it was just a pier.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, bugger this." Everyone was kind of farting around. I got all the security guards to download the scanning app on their phone. And I got a bullhorn, or a megaphone, bullhorn as they call it in the States, and just took charge of the situation. Said, "Everyone with tickets line up to the left, everyone guest list line up to the right. You know, move your asses, do it quickly, because if we don't get this boat out of here in 15 minutes, then the DJ sets are going to get shortened, because you couldn't start the music until you'd left the harbour, like, you know, got a certain distance away from the buildings. And if you departed late, that would shorten the amount of time you could be in the water, which would shorten the program." My role, artist liaison, so that was a responsibility that was going to fall on me, having to tell the artists that their set's been shortened because the boat didn't get away on time.
A conversation you didn't really want to have.
No. So I took charge of that situation, and we got off on time. And in the end, it was pretty funny, because the wife of the husband-wife couple, Jen, she grabbed her husband. She said, "I don't give a shit what you say. We're sponsoring his visa."
First
so that
gig.
was about 15 minutes in after I took charge of that situation. So that was handy. And I remember the feeling that night, cruising down the Hudson River. You know, you got the skyline of Brooklyn on one side, you got the skyline of New York on the other side, Manhattan. And, you know, I just kept thinking, wow, this is actually going to happen now. I'm going to be able to be here, you know, looking at that skyline. It's still one of the most inspiring views in the world, along with the Ibiza sunset, or, you know, anywhere else I've traveled. Looking at Manhattan from the Brooklyn side is pretty epic. So, yeah, I remember that really clearly. And then from there, kind of, Verboten was a traveling party at the time. So they were moving around various venues, you know, boat parties, a few venues in Brooklyn, a couple in Manhattan. And probably on average, we'd do 2 shows a week.
Right.
Different venues, sometimes 3. And sometimes we'd do like a big day thing with an after party. And then we found this space where we wanted to throw a festival, which was at the end of North 11th Street in Williamsburg. It was a government-owned paper factory, funnily enough, and had this huge car park around it, this huge U-shaped expanse around the warehouse. And we could use the loading bay of the warehouse as a stage and have everyone dancing in what was a giant car park. And, you know, it suited Brooklyn with this gritty sort of urban feeling. It suited Verboten. The branding was like this urban dystopian kind of sort of look. So in the process of finding this space to run an event, we found a space that could be used as a club. It was an old metalworkers factory, and there was this old Chinese man just kind of tinkering away in there. It was like his hobby hut, but it was far too big for it to be, you know, just, you know, it was like he was using it to get away from his wife or something.
It probably was.
There, you know, tinkering away for hours a day. And over time, we convinced him to sell up, and that was how the club came about. So we stopped moving and became a venue, which was cool.
And what was the deal with what was the deal with Stage One down in Brooklyn? Was that a festival?
Well, that was at that site. That was where we were talking about. So it was a one-stage, 5,000-person event. The stage viewed Manhattan skyline behind it. Sort of, you get the sun setting right there, which was, yeah, as I said, pretty special. That was the first time I met Luciano.
Right, yeah, the Chilean Swiss DJ.
Yeah, he ended up becoming and has become quite an influential person in my career. But that was the first day I worked with him, and you know, we did that, and we did that 3 times actually. That party, unfortunately, they all looked great and felt great, but didn't make any money.
Yeah, right. Problem.
Just an expensive site. Fees
Yeah.
at the time in New York were going up and up and up. You know, everyone had realised that this sort of music was cool, so to speak, and so a lot of people were trying to cash in on it. You know, major festivals that hadn't shown any interest in this genre in the past were now trying to produce an underground stage, and were therefore inflating the fees of the artists by, you know, trying to buy them in for a stage at Electric Zoo or a stage at wherever.
Mm-hmm.
That was inflating the fees of these guys, and
Yeah.
you know, it was just causing an issue for us too, really, as a smaller promoter, to have to deal with that kind of you know, inflation that wasn't really feasible for these smaller parties. You know, of 1,000 people, 800 people, 600 people.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, an artist's fees gone up 20-25%. You know, so
Economics just weren't working out.
not at all.
No.
And so eventually, I was still working for Future at the time, so I was going back to Australia and doing the Future Music Festival tour for half the year, and then coming back to New York and working with them for half the year. And I did that, you know, for a couple of years, and we built the club. And then, to be honest with you, there's something that wasn't adding up to me, something that didn't feel particularly right about things at the club and Jen and John. And in the end, gut never lies.
Yeah.
Jen hadn't been paying the IRS, and the IRS foreclosed on the club, which was huge news at the time in our scene. There's a guy called Dear Morny on Instagram who chastises DJs and just, you know, generally pokes fun at our industry. And a lot of people think he's really funny. He's a good friend of mine, actually. And geez, he had a field day on the
I bet.
You know.
Yeah.
Mainly Jen, you know, but there was all sorts of horrible things that came out. She never really, to me, it was kind of a weird thing for me, because on one hand, she'd given me the opportunity to work in the States through, you know, sponsoring my work permit. But on the other hand, there'd been times when emotionally she'd, you know, tried to manipulate me a little bit, and I hadn't accepted it or let it take place, because I think as Australians, we're probably less susceptible to that than some of these younger, impressionable New Yorkers that I was working with.
See it coming a mile off.
Yeah, and just not accept it, you know. But so I was lucky enough to get out of the club before it all went bust. I still lost a bit of money, but nothing crazy. And I remember my last night in the club thinking to myself, well, so I was on holidays back there about a year later, and the club was still running, but I knew that it was going to tank. And Nightmares on Wax was playing, so I rounded up 20 friends and took the table at the front of the club that was worth the most money, and ordered 4 bottles of Dom and 2 bottles of 1942, and just said, oh yeah, I'll pay the bill later when you guys pay me back the rest of that money you owe me.
Yeah, right.
We made a big night of it. For the last night, I knew I was going to be there.
But did you get the green card?
I got the work permit. I got a working permit, so
right.
I was able to work under that entity. But then that entity went bust.
Yeah, so, right.
But at that point, you know, we're now 4 years in, and that relationship started to deteriorate. So my need for being in New York, you know, after 4 summers wasn't really there. I was ready for the next challenge. I didn't really know what I was going to do.
Sure.
And I went back to Australia to do another season of Future Music Festival, which by then it was, you know, probably the premier touring festival in Australia.
Yeah.
Had some really strong years. And yeah, did the Cocoon Heroes stage with Sven Bath's brand, which I'd been influenced by in my trip to Ibiza a couple of summers before.
Which brand is that, sorry?
Cocoon.
Yeah, Cocoon. And who is it, like a sub-brand of? Or?
Sven Bath is the guy behind it. It's been 20 years last year of Cocoon.
Yeah.
It was a Monday amnesia for 17, 18 years or something like that.
Wow.
So, you know, I was very influenced by his music, and just him. He's a bit of an enigma himself.
I've heard that, yeah. An interesting cat.
Oh, beyond interesting. And, you know, he was fusing certain styles of fashion and, you know, pop culture, I guess, into our world, which hadn't been done before. It's, you know, he's one of the real pioneers. When you talk about pioneers like, you know, Richie Horton on a technology level, but Sven on a culture level, just for keeping the party alive and keeping the ridiculousness in the show and the fun in it, and reminding us that we're all essentially still creating parties and, you know, designing spaces for people to have fun in. So he was the master of that, you know.
Yeah.
And so I was very, you know, proud of what we did with that, with the Future Music Festival and Cocoon. And it built me some really powerful relationships too. These are intense tours. You do 7 shows in 10 days, sort of thing. Do 5 national festivals: Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Perth, Adelaide.
Yeah.
And then you do a Sydney and Melbourne side show as well. So, you know, it was my first real crack at touring that was that intense, looking after 5 artists. They used to have Sven every year, and then he'd invite 4 guests to represent Cocoon and play on the festival. And, you know, we'd split our team, which was quite small for the size of the festival. It was probably only 15 of us full-timers running the festival, and maybe 20. And, yeah, everyone sort of divided up that was in the talent department, and everyone would get like 5 or 6 people that to look after each, you know, whatever stage they were managing. You'd wind up being the primary point of contact for all the artists that were performing on that stage. And, you know, be like this big traveling circus around the country we'd go for 2 weeks, 300 odd people. You know, by the time you had all the touring parties, roadies, production people, you know, local promoters, it'd be like 200 to 300 people, I'd estimate.
Yeah, fair whack.
You take out whole hotels, and so the Cocoon guys, you know, they always had the reputation for being the party guys.
Yeah.
It led to some long hours and some nights I'll never remember with friends I'll never forget, kind of thing.
Yeah.
No, it was a really good time, and it was a good time for the music that was going on at that time, and it was nice for me to finally be working with music of a less commercial variety, stuff that I was really passionate about and thought was cool. So that was fun, and you know, led to a lot of good relationships. I linked back up with Luciano a few years into that Cocoon tour in Australia, probably. And the 3rd year, 4th year.
And is it Luciano? Is he the one that sort of brought you to Ibiza, if you like, or had you been there before yourself?
Yeah, that's right. Well, we had the relationship from New York the previous summer, and then he came to Australia, and said, "Oh, are you going back to New York?" And I said, "Well, no, at this point, I don't really need to. The club's open. I don't want to take a manager role at a venue." So no, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. And I was honest when I said this, but I said I'm thinking about grabbing a motorbike and going riding through India and Pakistan and doing a trip. And he laughed. And his tour manager at the time was a guy called Alban Piot. Alban's a world-class sound designer. Incredible. He used to work with like Lionel Richie and Lauryn Hill.
Yeah.
Before working with Luciano. So you could say he was probably a little bit overqualified to be working with a DJ, full stop. So Alban said something to Lucian in French. And then they looked at me and he goes, "No, you're not. You're not getting on a motorbike. You're going to come to Ibiza and work with us."
What was your first thought there?
Okay.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a personal crossroads because I just separated from the girl in New York after 4 years. So I was able to think for one.
Yeah. Had you been to Ibiza before this?
Yeah, I had.
Yeah.
And been a couple of times, really liked it. And wanted to work out a way that I could spend a season there or whatever. And this kind of happened. It was funny because so that happened and the Future tour finished. And I found myself in Perth for a little while. I was actually waiting for a friend from America to come meet me, and we were going to do a little bit of traveling around Australia. He'd never traveled in Australia, been to Australia. And
is that where you met Saul? Is that where you met Saul Bliss?
Yeah, it's actually what I was about to tell you. The night I met Saul. So there's a guy in Melbourne called Mike Toner who runs a touring agency called Thick as Thieves, and I'd always been quite friendly with him. And I happened to be on the phone to him one day, and he said, "Oh, if you're in Perth, you should go check out Geisha. It's a club there owned by friends of mine, Warwick and Kimmy. I sell them talent. They're lovely people. They'd really, you know, I'm sure they'll look after you. They're really great people." I said, "Okay, sounds brilliant." And he said, I'll give you a call. He connected me with Warwick, and to this day, they're actually quite close friends of mine that stayed with me in Ibiza a couple of summers ago. But I got to the club and they gave me a little credit card which had like pretty much unlimited bar credit on it, and introduced me to Saul, their resident DJ who lived in Ibiza. And I said, "Oh, this is good." They said, "You know, you guys should chat. You'll probably knock into each other in Ibiza." I said, "Oh yeah, great." So we traded numbers. We probably only chatted for about 30 minutes that night, Saul and I. And then continued traveling around Australia with my pal, Byron Bay Blues and Roots, Whitehaven, you know, proper East Coast, show your mate around kind of trip. And then we shot off to Southeast Asia. And at this point, I'm starting to get a bit anxious about when this contract's going to arrive from Luciano's team, you know, because I've said, yeah, we'll send you a contract, And if you've ever worked in international dance music, you'll know that it's a luxury to get a contract, because half the time you just agree to something and off you go, you know?
Yeah.
So, but I didn't want to move my life across the world without a piece of paper. Back then I was so ignorant and just thought, oh yeah, everyone gets a contract surely. And anyway, finally this contract came, and I realized that they'd just made it up themselves and written it on a piece of Word. But at least it was a signed piece of paper that had our basic terms that we'd agreed on, you know?
Yeah.
So off I went to Ibiza quite late. And the night it happened, we're in Vietnam. We're out on the piss. We're smashed. Been subject to some sonic ear rape from one of the local DJs playing some bloody Melbourne bounce or horrible shit that was starting to pop up at the time.
Yeah.
And got back drunk and opened my email on my laptop, and there was an email from Luciano. I said, "Oh, hello. There's a contract in there." Opened up Facebook, and Saul Bliss had posted a note saying one of his roommates had pulled out and he needed a third roommate for his apartment in Ibiza last minute. And then I looked at the flight website and there was a sale from Asia to Spain. So I was pissed, booked a flight, walked down to the lobby, got the guy at the hotel to print the contract for me. I signed it, had him email it back to me, forwarded it back to Luciano. And then I emailed Saul or messaged Saul on Facebook and said, "I'll take the room. What's your bank account? Here's 3 months rent."
Perfect.
So I did all that in about an hour and a half, between about 4 and 5:30 in the morning.
Wow, shit-faced.
While shit-faced.
Yeah.
And went to bed. I woke up the next day and my mate said, "Benny, what was that you were saying this morning about Ibiza?" I said, "Oh, shit." I opened my email, checked my bank account. I was like, "Guess I'm going."
Yeah.
So left 2 days later, pieced out on him in the middle of what was supposed to be a much longer Asia travel. And went off to start the season. Got there quite late, or by Ibiza standards, for the first season. Got there on the 5th of June. We had a party that Friday. I was jet lagged as buggery. I'll never forget it. I almost fell asleep in the DJ booth.
Yeah.
I was just exhausted. But
yeah. So
it's good.
So over there, you were at Pacha. You were doing space on Sundays for Luciano. Any other venues?
First year, I never worked at Pacha. The first year, I worked at Amnesia and at Destino, which was owned by the Pacha group.
That's the resort, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big, beautiful hotel. In my opinion, it's the best venue at Ibiza. But Luciano had a residency called Origins where he brought this concept. It was like a decor lineup concept into the terrace at Amnesia to support the Cocoon party with Sven. So you have Luciano on the terrace, and you'd have Sven in the main room. And so we did that. We did, I think, 12 or 10 dates out of the 16. And we did about another 8 or 9 dates at Destino, Luciano and Friends. And those Luciano and Friends parties were the stuff of legend. He was probably at his career peak then, I'd say, in terms of popularity and just relevance in general. And those parties, we did 8,000 at one of them. It was insane.
Yeah, right.
They were daytime, open air. That's what Ibiza is for me, is being able to dance under the stars.
Yeah.
And that was, for me, it was a pretty special time. It was my first summer there, and I was single for the first time in 4 years, which didn't hurt. And I was living with Mr. Saul Bliss, who's affectionately known to me as Dad.
Yeah.
And it took us a little while, Saul and I, to really work each other out, but once we did, oh boy, we really got together. and still very close. I actually caught up with him in Perth about a month ago. But we had another great roommate that he'd lived with the year before called Ruthie, and she was a makeup artist, and he was DJing around the island, and I was kind of running these shows. So between the three of us, we kind of...
Sorry, mate, I forgot to turn this off. Carry on.
We all had different friends and different social networks. So between the three of us, we could kind of get access to any particular event or party that we wanted to get access to on the island. So it really kicked the door off the hinges of Ibiza for me, because all of a sudden I was in this position where I was running these important shows. I was controlling a guest list, so made it pretty easy to ask other people that were controlling guest lists for favours when you've got the same to offer in return. You know,
it's all reciprocal.
It's all reciprocal in Ibiza in a big way. So that was cool. And that was kind of the first year. And then the next year, Luciano had me work for him again, but he found out that Space were willing to cover the payroll of his event manager. So rather than me have to be paid by him, he could have Space pick up the bill.
Yeah.
So I worked for him running his night, but on the books at Space.
Yeah.
That was how that arrangement sort of took place.
Cool.
And then that was the Sunday night. It was Vagabundos. It had some good weeks. It had some average weeks. But by then, they knew Space was going to close. So they were kind of bleeding it. And
so, sorry, were you running the promoters for this event, or?
I was running the whole event. Right, it was Luciano's night, so I was running the night.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine, Gaz, from Big Dog, move over to Ibiza that year.
Kempster.
Yeah, work as my 2IC, running the night with me. He walked into a good situation. By the time he got off the plane, we'd found him an apartment to live in, and I'd got him a job. Wasn't that well paying, but it was really good for the first year to network with and meet people and
enough to have fun with.
Oh, plenty to have fun with, and to just, like I said, to meet people, get himself some gigs. He met a lot of the crew that he calls good friends through that night, through working at that club, and me as well. So that was year two, Space, and then. All the while, I'm still doing Future in Australia, coming back and doing Future, coming back and doing Future. I met Seth Troxler at Summer Days when he toured with us, and we hit it off pretty well. And I started seeing him in New York when I was there, and we kept having him back for Future. And then his tour manager was wrapping up, and I'd become really good friends with him, the tour manager. And so his tour manager put it to me and said, Seth's got the busiest year of his life coming up. Would you be interested in replacing me as his tour manager? And I thought, yeah, I would. That seems like a step in the right direction. Step forward, new challenge, lots of work.
And what sort of thing does that role involve? Like, what sort of activities are you doing?
I mean, you're discussing the travel routing to try and make sure you make the most sensible decision. If you've got an advanced team, which luckily Seth was quite a big artist, so he did have, they'll probably book the flights and communicate with the promoter about the nitty gritty. So we'll just have to worry about the routing, the set times, making sure it all works. Seth was a vinyl artist, so there was a lot of management of the records, making sure they were clean, stacked in the right sleeves, set the right way so they didn't fall out of the bag or out of the sleeve. That was a big thing with Seth. And then, just in general, I mean, the key to being a good tour manager is being 5 minutes ahead of the artist. Yeah. So I knew Seth pretty well, so I knew what he was going to ask me for, when he was going to ask me for it, usually. If he wanted a drink, or if he wanted,
whatever,
a record or a weight for the deck or a joint or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was cool. It was a good experience with Seth. We were friends. To begin with, so it was a comfortable place to start from. It felt comfortable. We traveled. Probably did like 100 shows together that year, I'd say.
Right.
Close to it, because we did 7 or 8 on the Future tour at the start of the year. Then I started up with him in May, and most weekends were 4, 5, 6 shows for us at that point.
Jesus, right? Very busy.
So, it was my first time in a private jet.
Nice.
Was working with the Martinez brothers a lot back then as well, so we would often travel in a pack, be Seth and I, Jesse Coloso, who was their tour manager at the time, now an artist in his own right, and the Martinez brothers. There were 5 of us, and then Seth's girlfriend Louisa joined the clan a bit later in the summer, and we worked together for a year there, and then Seth decided to climb Mount Kilimanjaro for charity. yeah, you know, not wanting to do things in halves, Mr. Troxler. So he was actually pretty cool. He was raising money for brain cancer research in Australia because his
Right.
best friend is linked in with Dr. Charlie So in Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
And so they each had to raise $1 million before they were allowed to go on this trek. Oh, sorry, there was $1 million, or no, it was 100,000 each, and 10 of them raised 100,000 each. It was $1 million they raised in total. So that was pretty cool. But while he did that, I got a call from Seth's agent, a really famous William Morris agent called Steve Hogan. And he also was the agent for Pete Tong. And he said, well, listen, while Seth's in Kilimanjaro, would you mind covering Pete Tong for some shows? He's looking for a new tour manager. His tour manager's getting married this month and he doesn't know if he's coming back or not. So you mind covering him for these 3 weeks while Seth's away? That'd be great. I needed the money. I said, yeah, sure. And so started working with Pete. Would have been 4 years ago now. And once you start working with Pete, if he wants to keep you, you don't say no. So we hit it off pretty well. I got along with his wife really well. His kids are my age, a couple of them. So, big family vibe. Get along with his eldest 3 really well.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of a good fit. So I kept working with Pete Tong. Seth needed someone full time anyway that could be with him during the winter, and I was always going to go back to Australia for the summer.
Yeah.
So kept working with Pete Tong. Future finished up after that summer. It was acquired by Mushroom, Michael Gudinski.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't make money, so he decided to shut it down. And then after that happened, so I had a bit of a dry summer in Australia. I remember one summer was quite tough, actually. I was freelancing. And then back to Ibiza and back to Mr. Tong. And at this point, I was also doing a lot of sort of freelance gigs around the world. I picked up BPM Festival.
I was going to ask you about that. So was it just Mexico you were doing it, or were you doing it at some of the other locations as well?
Did the Portugal one when it started, which was like any festival in a new country in the first year, had some challenges, but I was proud of the work that we did and the team that we had. Mexico was amazing. Obviously, it ended tragically with the shooting. But there was a real family that put that on, and I felt deeply for the people affected by it. They became really close friends of mine and still are to this day. But so that was, and then I was also doing Corona Sunsets. The beer company had a one-day event that they were doing in various parts of Europe, and I was managing to tag on a few gigs with them. So it was, it was freelancing for a while there, but managing to keep enough work together. And Ibiza was just a constant. You know, there's plenty of work there during the summer. It's pretty much the epicenter, isn't it?
Absolutely. And because you were also events operations manager for the guys at, is it Novel Events, which is pitch, music and arts. And
that was after that. Yeah, that's correct. So that was after the freelance summer in Australia. Daniel Tumer, who is the owner.
I know Daniel. Yeah.
Yeah. He and funnily enough, he used to be a touring agent at Future. So we crossed over for one summer, I think, and then he was on the way out when I was on the way in. And at this point, Novel are doing all the underground dance and techno stuff, and I've got quite a lot of relationships in this world through Seth Troxler and Cocoon and Luciano and, you know, all these people that I've worked with. So Dan was actually visiting in Ibiza. He was on holidays, and I'd had a couple of shows with Pete. I'd just come back from tour, and also Rachel May Minx was in town, and a few other Aussies. So we decided to have a barbecue at the house and had some good friends over. And I just remember it was a really nice night. We popped a couple of bottles of champagne that I had kept from the rider. Thank you, Mr. Tong. Yeah. And we just got into these really nice, deep, open chats. And it was the first time that Dan and I had ever really talked about anything on any real deep human level that wasn't event or music related. And we struck up a really good accord. He rang me the next week and he said, listen, I need someone to come on at Novel as my operations manager. Would you consider the role for 6 months of the year when you're back in Australia? I said, yeah, sure. Sounds good. You know, we moved pretty quickly from there. We agreed to terms within a week over the phone. And it was a good role. It was a lot. to take on. There wasn't really any guidelines. It was kind of jump in the deep end and work it out when I arrived there. But I was paid fairly for it, so I was happy to put in some time and make it work. And it's really enjoyable. Great bunch of people over there. At that time they had already established Let Them Eat Cake. It was probably in its fourth or fifth year, I reckon. And that was at the Werribee Mansion on New Year's Day for about 10 to 15,000 people. Amazing event, one-day event, then a party that goes for 2 days. But, then they were also establishing. Yeah, there's a lot of cake going in the mansion for sure, Al. But they were establishing pitch at the time, which was more what I was going to be brought on board to assist with. It was a very ambitious project, you know, looking at taking on a 4-stage festival, 3 hours out of Melbourne, creating essentially a mini Burning Man for 4 days, where you built your own community. You know, people are out there camping. The whole site's completely self-sufficient. Trying to run it with a leave no trace ethos, even though Australians can be pretty horrible with that sort of stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
We live in a pretty disposable market, disposable society. But it was an ambitious project, and something that was really challenging for me at the time. It was probably the most challenging thing I'd taken on professionally, was advancing, 40 or 50 tours at once. And we had other major shows in other cities to prop up those tours that I had to do the logistics for. You have a big show in Brisbane on Friday for 15 of the artists. Saturday there was a festival in Sydney called Days Like This, which we part-owned. We'd do all the logistics for that. And then they'd play pitch as well over the weekend. So you'd have 3 major events running at once. We'd be 3.5 hours out of Melbourne. I remember the first year we didn't have great internet. So that was a bit of a nightmare. But we made it work, and it was really quite incredible, and proud of that work that was done there. And you were people that. Sorry,
I was going to. You were also involved with the 121 festival. Is that?
Yeah, that came out of Novel. It's interesting because 121 was a club in Wellington, and they were promoters that I was selling talent to. As part of my job at Novel was to set up tours.
Mm.
And I would sell these guys talent, and they would produce shows themselves in Wellington in New Zealand. And we got to know each other over a phone email relationship over about 3 years. So I'd never met the guys. And then when I left Novel at the beginning of last year, 12 months ago, they'd said they wanted to do a festival, and I knew it was on the cards for them to share. They wanted to share some talent with the pitch festival and potentially run the week after, which I thought was a good idea, and would strengthen the pitch touring offers as well. So it was a win-win for everyone. So once I left Novel, they were like, well, if you've got some time on your hands, how would you feel coming on board and consulting for us for this festival? Because, we've never taken on a project this big, and you have. So I went on board with them in a consultative capacity, and after a couple of months, really liked the direction the lineup was taking. Nina Kravitz, Ben UFO, Black Madonna, these people had all signed on. They managed to land Hiatus Coyote, the Black Seeds, and a bunch of other big bands that appealed to the New Zealand market. But I might like to invest in this because it's looking pretty solid. So I actually said to the guys, would you be looking for an investor? They said, well, we're not, but you bring skills to the table. So I ended up buying into a share of it. And that just took place a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, just made it.
Yeah.
It's pretty lucky on that one. Now, I heard you were at a party in Fiji back in 2016 on Plantation Island with, again, Seth, Troxler and Skillrex. Was that something you were actually at, or just a virtual attendance because someone's tagged you in a post?
Nah, you're correct. I forgot about that one. Like I said, I was freelancing for a while back then. So one of the jobs I took on was a 5-day festival in Fiji called Your Paradise, where I was to run the operations. And I won't speak poorly of anyone, but I wasn't a paradise for me. I picked up a pretty tough task. The logistics of being on a small remote island, and some planning that had been made by someone else and then handed to me, led for a bit of a recipe of difficult event. But
that's one to forget.
Yeah, it's one to forget. We executed it. The punters had fun. I made some great friends, actually, that I'm still friends with from that week. But
cool. So it wasn't all bad.
complicated one. No, it wasn't. It was just a complicated one. You have those from time to
Yeah,
time.
absolutely. And like some gigs, you'd say the grass is always greener, and that's another festival that you're at in Queensland. Were you just a punter there, or were you working there?
No, I was one of the owners of that one too. So that came from stage managing gig. Was stage managing the original version. A guy called Christian Avant from Sydney put me forward to stage manage, and he actually owned a share in this brand originally with a promoter from Queensland who's now one of my best friends, Ollie Frost, and I went up to stage manage, ended up helping them bump in and bump out, doing a couple of days work. And after the first year, Christian had to withdraw because he was opening a fast food chain called Milky Lane, which he operates. And so there was an open share. And I developed a good relationship with the guys, so I asked if I might buy his share. And they said, yeah, we'd love to. So I ran that for 3 years and only really moved off that one, so I'd have the capital to invest into 121 because I couldn't afford to do both. And 121 musically was more aligned with what I know and what I understand. Grass is Greener was more of a Triple J format, and whilst it was always successful, I just didn't feel like I could contribute as much to something that I didn't understand the music of. So when the 121 opportunity came up, I had to choose, and chose to invest some money that side and roll the dice with those boys, and shoot. Sort of ended up being a really good move the way it worked out, to be honest.
Yeah, nice one. If you could be anywhere in the world right now, and let's pretend there's no virus going on, and you could make it any time of the year you wanted, where would you go and what time of year would you go there?
First week of January in Tulum.
Right. No hesitation.
No hesitation. And equally matched by the month of September in Ibiza.
And why those? Well, so obviously September is the closing parties in Ibiza. What about
September's the month before? The closing parties happen in October, but everyone works so hard in July and August that when September comes, everyone loosens their belt a little bit, and all the people that live in the island kind of just enjoy. There's a few more social events that pop up. Solomon does his +1 party for free for the people of the island in the port. There's a lot of after parties and pop-up things that happen. It's just like that, oh shit, the season's almost over, we better make the most of it kind of feeling that goes to the island. And a lot more social activities tend to come from that, people hanging out together, which is cool. So I love that. And the first week of January in Tulum is just where all the great events are on. It's just a concentration of great people, wicked music, awesome events in one of the most beautiful places in the world. So for 7 days, you can pretty much see any DJ you want. In the jungle in Tulum, you know, and there's just absolutely wicked crowd from all over the world, you know. So
cool. Now I was going to ask you what you've got coming up this year, but I guess everything that's going on with this virus, that could be a tricky one to answer.
My main project at the moment is called Sound Source, and what Sound Source does is it's a curation platform for spaces, businesses, restaurants, bars, hotels, flight lounges, these type of places. What I found is a lot of people have spent all this money on a fit out or architecture, you know, even down to the finest detail of what font they're using on a menu, you know, staff uniforms, lighting. But a lot of the time they don't put any thought into the music in the space, and it ends up just being Robbo's Spotify playlist or whoever's working that day, just putting whatever their preference is on in the space.
Even I find in hospitality, even with venues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so it's a massive gap in the market that exists. So we call it sound tracking, and it's a space I'm tackling. It's a relatively new market, so we're kind of making it up as we go along, I suppose, which is exciting in a sense. But using some artists that I work with and some other, you know, keen musical ears that I've sort of developed relationships with, and creating customized soundscapes for spaces. So at the moment, that one's on hold too, because a lot of these hospitality places are closed, but I'm going to use this time now to get ahead and building content for the genres that I curate within, so that when everything opens back up,
you'll be ready to go.
And the other plan is to move to Ibiza full time.
Wow. And would you stay in the old town or up north or somewhere else?
Sad Geordie, there's a really dear friend of mine who's got a beautiful property there, 5-bedroom house. It's a very comfortable place and a nice energy there. So it's where I'd like to be for the foreseeable.
Yeah, right. Sounds like a pretty good plan. Now, we've obviously covered quite a bit today. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make mention of?
No, not really. Other than if I was to say one thing, it would just be that sometimes I've found lately that we've all gotten a bit too serious, and the politics and of it all has gotten a bit much in certain areas the last couple of years, you know. And I think you know, things happen like this COVID situation that bring you back down to a grounding, whether it's forced like this one or something happens in your life that grounds you. But I'm just trying to enjoy it and remember why I do it, because, you know, there've been moments when I've fallen out of love with it. So it's been about finding that balance and what fills my cup. And I guess I hope that everyone else is looking after themselves and doing the same thing at the moment while this is all going on, you know?
I think when it finally passes, everyone will be raring to go, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I hope we get a season this year, even if it's delayed, because I think it'll be a special one.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I always like to finish with the same question for all my guests, and that is, what is your favourite party story of all time that you're happy to talk about on the podcast? Because obviously there's a few that you wouldn't.
I'll probably a bit sub details, but there was a certain after party in Perth after the Future Music Festival that was pretty epic. That involved Seth and Ricardo, Magda and myself going back to some punter's house.
Yeah, right. Andy Scally wasn't there by any chance? Oh no, he's with the Stereosonic crew. That's right.
He wouldn't have been around. And I just that was pretty amazing watching Ricardo and Seth play records in women's bikinis in the backyard.
Yeah, right.
But then other ones that stick out was one in particular home in Ibiza that the Fernando Alonso family used to own as their holiday home, and
wow.
It's got a soccer pitch on it. It's got a go-kart track around it, and it's got I guess it was a wine cellar that got turned into a cave, which is a nightclub for about 120 people. It's got a void sound system in it, air conditioning and a bar, and they hold some pretty amazing after parties there. So there was a birthday of the promoter of Cocoon, Johannes. And it's the same week as Ricardo Villalobos and a few of the others. They all have a birthday in the same week, so they call it Lion Week.
Yeah.
And I remember pretty clearly dancing on a pool that was covered in a see-through dance floor to Richie Horton and Ricardo Villalobos at that house. So they'd probably be the two that stick out.
Yeah, nice one. Well, it sounds like someone's about to fire up a cordless drill or something there, so it might be a good time to wrap it up.
Yeah, it sounds like they have, mate, so I'll let you go. But,
yeah, no worries. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. It's been great to catch up. I mean, I've just seen your posts from all over the world, like over the years, and thinking, shit, there he goes again, you know. So definitely good to get the details.
Yeah, well, the Instagram name is Where Is BH, because no one ever really seems to know these days. So
yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, thanks again, mate, and all the best.
Good for a chat. Cheers, pal.
Cheers, mate.